Now that the planet that the chitters come from has been secured, their queen freed, and security left in place in the form of the defense satellites, it's time for us to move on to free our other friends. My crew was all aflutter as they seemed to realize very quickly that the next stop was going to be their home. Sort of. You see, it was 4 jumps away, 4 entire sectors. This would take us a long time to traverse across, and very high chance at this point that somebody had sent out some sort of distress call that we didn't pick up. As good as our technology is, you never know, and we were not taking any chances. We coordinated with all the main battleships so that we could all jump simultaneously without crashing into each other. This would cause us to look similar to a very, very large mass of asteroids. Not very close to each other, but just in case you're off, because let's face it, during a jump, if you're off by even a couple of mils, or God help you, degrees, you could end up jumping right into another ship, literally forming molecule by molecule inside each other within less than a second. If that happens, well, only one thing happens after that. Boom. Critical mass is a bitch at that point. And God help you if your gravity motors coalesce with each other at that point. If you're really unlucky, you'll cause a micro black hole and you'll suck the whole fleet into it. So we had to be very, very, very careful. The calculations took several hours for us to receive to make sure everybody was in the right spot. I had all my fighters locked in, everyone was locked down. The Corvette was lined up and ready to go, and off we went. 1 jump, waiting a few hours. 2nd jump, had to wait for everything to cool off. 3rd jump, okay, where is everybody? We should have come across somebody at this point. But the next jump we know is active. The Zels, for their small size, are surprisingly prized, just because they can get in and out of different areas, and they're smart enough to not break things that aren't meant to be broken. Also, they turned out to be a hell of a lot smarter than people give them credit for. In fact, their problem-solving abilities, I would say, are pretty close to ours. The difference of maybe a teenager compared to a 50 or 60-year-old. The difference being minute, really. Though they still talked in a way that was very similar to that of a teenager, in that they used a lot of slang and kind of strange terms. They would always come up with new stuff. It was kind of funny at first, but got old really, really, really fast. As I told them to brace for the next jump, they all strapped in, all giddy. Even Junior was all sorts of happy, so much so I swear I thought I saw him pee himself a little bit. But I didn't have time to worry as the countdown came. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, jump. And when we jumped, what we saw in front of us was enough to make my heart drop out of my ass. Their entire planet was just covered in ships. They were everywhere. My sensors couldn't even pick them all up. But that wasn't even the worst part. It wasn't just one planet, it was several. At least 2 other planets had already been colonized by we had no idea what. We were too far out. We were around their 7th planet, just waiting to see what was going to be there. Only an idiot jumps in that close to someone's home system, not knowing what type of enemy is going to be there. So we always jump to the edge of their system, just in case. This became common practice for most. However, if you're trying to do an invasion, you usually just go in guns blazing. But the last thing we wanted to do was actually destroy ships that had our friends on them. And boy howdy, did we get ready. Our fleet immediately mobilized, turned towards their home planet, and went full burn straight towards them. It would only take us about 4 hours to get there. During that time, my crew checked, double-checked, triple-checked, quadruple-checked everything. Every single system was brought online that needed, and anything not needed was shut down. we knew this could get ugly real fast. And unfortunately, we were right. As our fleet approached, we were inundated by several hailing frequencies, claiming in many different languages that we are trespassing. Who are you? What are you doing here? Just anything that came through, many of which were their own versions of cursing. Although, in all honesty, once it was translated to English, was honestly hilarious. But then again, you can do the same thing with a lot of different languages here on Earth. What's going to happen when you actually translate it directly? It sounds goofy as all hell. But we didn't have time to really laugh about it. We simply primed our weapons and continued to move in. The fleets that were around the planet just seemed to almost take a nonchalant look to us, because it wasn't until we got at least one planet's atmosphere away that we realized they didn't see us as a threat. And all I could think of, you got a half a dozen massive dreadnoughts here with their main weapons pointed directly at you. You got several battleships floating around. You got destroyers, frigates, patrol craft, corvettes, you name it, and it was pretty obvious that we had primed all our weapon systems. And they're just gonna sit there? Boy, the universe is weird. Eventually, the fleet command sent out a message in every single language at the same time, except for human. This was a way, I'm sure, just to throw them off, to make sure they didn't realize it was us. We didn't need a bigger target on our face. The message was simply, surrender. Run, and we will kill you. You will no longer take the natives of this planet as your slaves. Power down or fight. In other words, power down or die. Boy, that guy was straight to the point. Very straight to the point. I heard the whole thing in English, and ooh boy, the sheer anger he had in his voice eclipsed my own as I told my crew to man the guns. They all scurried up into their turrets and got ready. I locked on with all mine as well, and we continued to move in. It would take us only about 30 minutes to reach our target world, as it was coming into our sector. A lot of people forget that planets move, and if we're moving in one direction and their planet is moving towards us, it moves a hell of a lot faster than you realize. Soon I could see the planet way off in the distance. I didn't need sensors anymore. But I also turned on the stealth rig. What they had not known for the longest time is that we had been working on stealth. Without stealth, fighters in space don't work well. Ever. But you can stealth rig anything up to about the size of a frigate. Anything bigger than that just puts off too much reflective material no matter what you circle it with. It's going to have a heat corona that you can't hide. It just happens that way. With all the electronics and warm bodies inside, you just can't hide that. It's just there. Which we never told the aliens. That's why we could target their battleships so easily. Our weapons immediately would cycle through, lock on the largest target, and end them. As we got close, we could see that multiple fleets were consistent of the K's, the Joren, which we just called the Zhen. I'm like, okay, whatever. I didn't come up with a name, people. There was also the Korak, which was a new species to us. I barely remember seeing one. However, when I saw the type of species as I searched through the database, my blood ran cold. As I looked over, I could see that there were two of the same creatures that we had saved from them. These demon-looking creatures, and yes, they did look demonic, were still on my ship. I looked over at them and realized that they were scared. As soon as they heard that name, it frightened them to the core. In fact, one curled up into a ball as she curled her arms around her knees, the same way any young girl would do when she's afraid. Oh, now I'm pissed. Did they hurt children? Did they... Okay, I need to just keep that temper down for a little while longer. I looked over at my XO, and I simply stated, "Take the helm, I'm going out." He looked at me, and I swear that toothy grin wrapped halfway around his frickin' head as he realized he would have a chance to bring all sorts of holy hell to those who had subjugated his planet and taken his people. I got into my fighter, and it was a very silent release into the blackness. I was able to rotate just in time to see the cargo bay doors shut behind me as I began to accelerate. I had already flipped on the stealth system, and as I looked around, I could see the IFF codes coming from all the other fighters. Everything was a closed circuit, so there's no way the enemy could actually lock onto it. And we began to continue our way, but this time we had a hell of a lot more guns ready. I primed everything, and it was about that time that the groups that were around that planet realized that we were coming in and we were not taking any prisoners. Apparently, they thought what we had said before was a bluff. Oh no, it was no bluff. Eventually, we saw that they had their own destroyers. Several of the original K destroyers were there. There was also ones I had only seen one other time. The Kagarin? Kagarin? You know what? Fuck it. It's not the K's. It starts with a C, but whatever. I had only seen them one other time as well. Their sector, their home sector that is a long way off. What the hell they're doing over here, I don't know. Probably looking for more slaves. But you know what? Now was not the time. Eventually, we got a few more responses from what the fleet commander had sent. Most of these responses were simple, I guess you could say, bite me. They didn't think we would actually fire first, as they realized their own fleets, if they realized who we were, would simply come down on us like the hammer of all sorts of angry gods to come at us. They believed they were protected. They believed that they did not have to listen, and as we saw several of the ships began to go away, breaking the gravity well and start blinking out as they jumped to FTL speed, all I heard from the fleet command was, "They're running. All ships. Weapons free." And with that, every single ship in the fleet accelerated right up to its maximum level, and they began charging the lines. I'm sure it was a surprise to many of those on that planet and above it when they saw that our battleships and our dreadnoughts were a hell of a lot faster. In fact, this fighter craft needs an upgrade because I was actually having trouble keeping up with them. And because of that, we all came into weapons range, or I should say effective weapons range. If you know anything about space, you know it takes time for a shot to land, which means someone can dodge. Once they're within effective weapons range, there's no way they're going to miss. They're going to hit something. And with that, the main guns began to fire. They immediately targeted most of the engines, trying to stop these ships from leaving. Most of the ships realized they were under attack and began to flee as best they could. I simply keyed the comms. "This is Piranha 6 Actual. Fighters, try to take him down without killing him. We don't know who's inside. Aside from that, happy hunting." And with that, I launched the throttle and hit the accelerating boost, which is a type of, I don't want to say turbo boost, because that's from a show that most people don't remember even before the war happens. But I guess you could say an afterburner in space. With that, the G-forces that push against you are really, really bad. But at that point, I didn't care. Getting within weapons range myself and my main guns, I could see several of the larger ships begin to fire at the fleet. Most of their destroyers had come around the side of the planet and began to fire pot shots towards our folks. but they did not care. We sent up interceptors, decoys, and all sorts of flak and anything else. It was difficult for anybody in a fighter to actually make a headlong shot towards the line without getting clipped by our own people. So of course we had to duck far around to the outside to try and make our way in. But because of that, we were able to catch many of the ships as they tried to make their way outside the gravity well. I came up close and got just outside of visual range. Using my sensors, I locked onto the engine. I also did a scan. This sucker was loaded with biological material, i.e., there was a lot of personnel on board. So I had to make this count. I held my fire as best I could as I ducked and bobbed and weaved as I got closer, dodging not only fire from the enemy but also from my own side. As I locked in, I found their engines. Their engines were very small for a ship that size. I pinged the ship and I got on the comms and said, "This is Piranha 6 Actual. If you're willing to come and help me, I'm taking this one down. It's loaded. Over." And with that, I just heard several pings over my comms. Confirmation that I had assistance on the way. Checking the radar, I realized they were right behind me. I locked in on the engine compartment just as their point defense systems turned to lock onto me because I was just within range, but they didn't have time. I fired and hit the engine compartment. The engine burst with a magnetic force. It's a strange rainbowish color that bursts out whenever the engines are hit. Different frequencies of different engines and particles started spewing out, which made for something quite pretty to look at, but I didn't have time to even consider it. I let my fighter drift by, taking a few more shots into the engine until I realized that she was dead in space. Then I immediately got up close, ended up right next to one of the hatches, shot off a couple of their point defense cannons as I docked with the ship. I locked it on to my dorsal hull, and it began to cut its way through. This was the standard to getting in. I made sure that there was a pure seal because I did not discharge any of my atmosphere. I made sure that I had all the atmosphere I needed. Normally, decompression is needed when doing this because you don't know what's on the other side, but the last thing I needed was the pressure from the other side to knock me on my ass as I was trying to make my way in. Thankfully, as soon as I got the buzz that it through, I ran up, hit my shoulder into it, and immediately the plating fell off. And then I was inside. As I rushed inside, I could see that there were dozens, if not hundreds, of slaves, all of them with collars. It wasn't just Zell either. It was so many. The demon-type kids. Seriously, what are these things? We're going to find out once we get back to Earth. But it wasn't them. There were more even chitters on board. There was all sorts of different ones. There was a strange type of almost octopus-looking thing that was there almost sliming on the ground. The gravity that was on these ships must have been way too much for it. As I looked over and saw the different collars, I knew that I had entered the slave compartment and I wanted some blood for these folks. As they shied away from me, as I was in full battle armor, they didn't know who or what I was. I simply walked up to one of them. This male Zell stood in front of, I'm guessing, its mate. Its mate holding several young ones. Some of them didn't even look like they were more than a few days old. As it held its arms up in the standard way to block anything from happening to its kin, it kind of shied its head away, waiting for the impact. I reached over. Slowly with one hand, I grabbed the side of the collar, and with the other hand, I slowly grabbed the other side. And then, violently, I ripped it in half and threw it on the ground. The Zell just stopped, opened its eyes, looked at me, and then put its hand up on its neck, caressing it a little, couldn't believe what had just happened. I pulled a tool from my belt and reached up, grabbed his hand, and put the tool in there. I then moved his hand over to his mate, and I showed him how the tool will actually break the control collar that was around their neck. It was a simple flick of the wrist, almost, but you had to make sure it was in the right spot, and the control collar would short out and fall off. And then it looked at me as soon as its mate was free, and again it smiled. I raised back up to my feet, reached over, grabbed my weapon, and went towards the door. By this time, I could see on my IFF code radar that several others had made it into the ship. I keyed in. It's Piranha 6 Actual. Anyone on this ship with me? Be careful, this thing is loaded to the gills with slaves, and I want them alive. Understood. Several pings came across the board. I reached over to the control panel, but the damn thing wouldn't open. Not surprising. So I simply shot it. And then I reached up, grabbed one of the tools I had, and began to slice open the door itself. I cut down the seam of the door right down the side. This bulkhead door was surprisingly tough, but I didn't have time to worry about it. As soon as I got enough cut, I backed up, crashed my shoulder into it, and it gave way just enough where I could get my hands through. And using the power of the exosuit and myself, I began to rip the door off. As I did, I could see on the other side the slaver crew. "You avian bastards," was the only thing that came out of my mouth. They all held weapons and pointed them at me, but they were shaking. This thing they were looking at, this thing that was in a full exosuit, had just ripped a bulkhead door open with its bare hands. They kind of looked at the weapons they were holding and were just like, "Oh crap, will this even work?" And just as I started to step through, they began to fire. Out of sheer panic, they started blasting towards me. My exosuit deflecting most of the energy blast, but I realized it would only take so many before it started to fry some of the electronics inside, and eventually it would get to me. So I rushed them, crashed into them, and slammed them against the other wall, one cracking its ribs right up against the side as he coughed up blood and just slumped over. The other one I caught in the neck, and with a satisfying crunch, he was done before he even realized what was happening. I turned and looked, and there were several others down the hallway. And as I ran towards them, they began to fire. I keyed the shield on my arm, raised it up, an energy shield went up. It won't stop ballistics, but it sure will deflect the crap out of these energy blasts they use. They seemed to realize that they were completely useless, and one of them decided to grab their weapon and try to use it almost as a spear as they lunged towards me. I simply used my arm and batted him off to the side. I could hear arms and legs crack as they hit the wall, and then I crashed into the group, just reaching and tearing. I had had enough of these fucking birds. You damn birds. That's all. You damn birds. But as they began to jump on me, my exosuit started to reach its limit on its weight, and I was down to one knee, and that's when I said, "I got it!" And then crash is all I heard. Suddenly, there was no weight on top of me. I raised myself up and looked and realized that one of the others had come up behind me, saw that I was in trouble, and did a flying tackle, catching all the birds that were trying to push me down. He was climbing to his feet in a pile of blood, feathers, puke, and shit. I looked up, just gave him a thumbs up, grabbed my own weapon, and continued. If this is the way it's going to go, we're taking the bridge now. God help us what's going to happen there. And both of us charged through. As we did, I could see on my IFF radar that we had friendlies coming down the hallway. I knew they were right behind us. I couldn't see behind because that's not what this suit allows you to do. Nor did I really care. Both of us ran up, smashed into the door, and with a sudden stop, we realized that we had just bent the bulkhead door. But it had stopped us. These guys were learning. These things weren't as cheaply made as they were before. So each of us just looked at each other. We reached our monomolecular cutters and simultaneously reached up to the top of the door, shoved them in, and I went down the right side, he went down the left, both of us holding both hands to pull the monomolecular cutter down as it slowly cut away at the bulkhead door. I can only imagine what they were thinking on the other side. As we got towards the bottom, I saw a third one of the humans that was with me jump up with his own. Where we had started, he had jabbed right in the center and started pulling it straight down the center of the door. Now there were 3 of them cutting through this thing like a knife through hard cheese. And just as we finished, we looked over, and I turned and I saw 2 more humans. I couldn't see their faces through their masks, but I could tell by their stance they were ready to get this over with. I stepped away, and those two simply rushed forward and slammed into the doors, both falling forward as the metal got in their way, both rolling to their feet as the other three of us rushed in, and we could see that the captain was there behind some sort of large energy weapon. I ducked off to the side as he fired, and it fired all the way down the hallway. Good thing, too. Something that strong might actually get through our suits. But before he had a chance to adjust fire, one of the other guys pulled his weapon and fired right through. I didn't have time to say no as the projectile not only went through the bird's skull, but clean through the hull to the outside. Oh, wonderful, you dumbass. As we saw that the air was leaking out exceptionally quick from this hole, well, we only had one choice. We grabbed the nearest whatever we could and slammed it up against the hole to slow it down as much as we could. We didn't have anything on us, at least I didn't, to seal the hole, but thankfully somebody else came prepared. They put sealant gel around it and made it airtight again, but we realized that they had lost a lot of air pressure and a lot of their oxygen levels very, very quickly. Now we didn't have time to slowly help these folks out. Immediately, I started screaming, "Find the control collars! Find the control collar panel! Where is it?" "It's over here, sir. We got it." And with that, I actually saw him shut it down. And with that, I could hear in the background small click, click, clicks as all the control collars that had not already been taken off simply disengaged and fell off the slaves. I turned to everyone and said, "Well, this bucket of bolts ain't worth nothing anymore. Grab who you can. Head back to the fleet." "Yes, sir," was all they got. And they knew who I was, as I had made sure my rank was stenciled onto this suit, along with my call sign. With that, everyone ran back down the hallway to their individual levels, opening up every single doorway they could, and we motioned for the slaves to follow us. I looked at how many there were, and I had to call in, "This is Piranha 6. We need recovery vehicles here now. Any recovery vessels in this area, pinging my location." Bing! I waited a few moments. "This is Recovery 419. We're on our way. ETA, 2 minutes." "Roger, 419. Be advised, we have lost pressure. It's being held by sealant gel right now. We don't have much time. Get it here quick." "Roger, Piranha 6. We're having a little trouble out here, though." "What?" Immediately, I ran towards my ship so I could get a good look at what the hell was going on, and sure enough, these guys had brought in reinforcements. I was actually amazed at this. I didn't think they would protect a planet this, what we thought, insignificant. The Zels don't breed that fast. Why would they give a shit about this planet so much? Why? But it didn't matter. At this point, now, it was time to show them our true mettle. As I felt the recovery ship dock with us, we could see that they had docked onto one of the cargo bays. Thankfully, the recovery ships were designed specifically so that they could open up those cargo bays and get everyone out. As soon as we realized which cargo bay it was, we ushered everyone out as fast as we could. And we're trying to say hurry, 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 but our translator just kept putting it out in different languages. Then, considering how many different slaves there were, it didn't matter. But they got the idea. As soon as they were inside the recovery ship, we double-checked to make sure that it was clear. I got the clear, clear, clear. Good. Evac, get out of here. I don't care if you depressurize this fucking ship. Just get out of here. Recovery 419, you are clear. Disengage and get back behind the lines. Roger, Piranha 6. With that, we felt the ship disengage. It was a violent jerk that sent us off to the side, and then on top of that was the sudden burst of loss of decompression as the ship decoupled. The whole cargo bay was open, and now we had a pretty strong breeze trying to hold us back. Good thing for the exosuits, or we'd really be screwed. I ran back to the ship once I could, got into mine, and then immediately got running. I disengaged and started doing strafing runs on the nearest enemy ship I could find. Fortunately for us, and unfortunately for them, I still had a full load of torpedoes. And it wasn't 30 seconds later when an enemy battleship jumped in, couldn't have been 50 meters from my freaking face. The amount of maneuvers I had to do turned my insides almost into salsa as I had to move, bob, and weave as this thing was so large it was right there. I had to disengage the safeties on the torpedoes, face the ship, immediately do a retro rocket away just far enough where I wouldn't get caught up in the blast. And I just remember saying, well, your timing sucks, and fired every single one of my torpedoes at point blank range. I don't even think they realized my ship was there as the torpedo sunk deep into its hull. I could see its turrets start to fire at our fleet as the torpedoes began to explode in size, causing secondary and tertiary explosions. The hull began to blow out from one side to the other, from their starboard to their dorsal side. And I just watched the fireworks for a moment. Then I realized, wait a minute, I'm still in a goddamn firefight. With that, I immediately turned and I locked on to any enemy drone I could and fired every single missile. We had to take them out as fast as possible, but once a missile at that range has you locked in, I don't care if it's a drone, you're done. They didn't understand chaff, they didn't understand decoys. They just wanted to hit you with as many as possible. So at least one would get through. I guess that was their idea. Strength through numbers, right? Yeah, no. With that, I spun around to look at the alien battleship. It was still spinning out of control. Apparently, something had happened. It wasn't able to fire any type of stabilizers. I could almost see inside one of the portholes as something smashed up against it and the splat of blood against the side. Ugh, inertia's a bitch, man, is all I thought to myself as I cranked my ship to the another side and began to turn and bob and weave, looking for any other targets of opportunity. There was only one more, and it was a destroyer trying to push its way away from the line, fully retrograding while keeping its main guns pointed at our fleet. I looked at our fleet, and they did not get away unscathed by any stretch of the imagination. Some of them had huge burn marks. Others of them, unfortunately, had been eviscerated. So I was like, okay, motherfucker, my turn. I pinged it and got in the radio and keyed saying, "This is Piranha 6 Actual. Anyone want to help me take this fish apart?" I didn't even need the pings to realize, as I saw many of them, not only on my radar, but visually I could see them, as we bobbed and weaved around their point defense systems and began to strafe with every single energy weapons we had left. The solid lasers, the pulse lasers, it didn't matter. Some of these guys had retrofit their ships to have an extremely strong short-range energy beam that seemed to just carve into this ship. One of these, I swear that may be a good idea against large targets, but against small targets they're going to have a lot of problems. But it didn't matter. I smiled as this guy got in perfect firing position and fired from stem to stern that energy blast, and I know, because I know the layouts, it not only pierced the bridge, but it got their citadel as well. Yes, they have a citadel, a battle bridge. Immediately it went adrift, and the battle did not last much longer. Most fights in space don't last long unless there's massive amounts of reinforcements. What we had known when we started to take these ships was that they had already sent a distress call to any nearby fleets. Well, this was going to get very, very interesting, because now we had space superiority. But now what do? You can't just fire down on the planet. You're trying to save these people, not destroy their world with them on it. So what do you do next? The answer to that is surprisingly simple. I looked around at my weapons locker, realizing that I hadn't used up much of any ordnance at all so far. Except for, of course, my torpedoes and missiles, which were completely dry at this point. I realized it's time to go to the surface, and we're going to show them how humans play hide and go seek.